All right, John, shall we get started?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. Today's Friday, so it's Self-Improvement Friday, and I'm delighted, as always, to have my friend John here talking about self-improvement. So let me just hand it over to him and take it from there. John.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be back. I missed last week. It's nice to see everybody again. I watched last week's discussion on YouTube on 52 Living Ideas on the channel. I was very grateful to see everybody there and sharing what they got out of the value out of all the, not all the past meetups, but a several accumulation of what Shrikant has been chosen for his previous meetups. So that was really interesting. It's nice to be back here. And today we are talking about Aesop's fable titled The Thief and His Mother, and how it relates to, I would say, sins of omission. We're going to get into what omission means, and we're going to look at some implications and all that. But if you're not familiar with the fable itself, that's totally fine. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to dive into the analysis. So, Aesop's fable of The Thief and His Mother. So it is as follows. A schoolboy stole a book from one of his schoolmates and brought it home to his mother. Instead of chastising him, she rather encouraged him in the deed. In the course of time, the boy, now grown into a man, began to steal things of greater value until at length, being caught in the very act, he was bound and led to execution. Perceiving his mother in the crowd, wailing and beating her chest, he begged the officers to allow to speak one word in her ear. When she quickly drew near and applied her ear to her son's mouth, he seized the lobe tightly between his teeth and bit it off. Upon this, she cried out loud, and the crowd joined her in upbraiding the unnatural son. As if his former evil ways had not been enough, but that his last act may be a deed of impiety against his mother. But, he replied, to justify himself, it is she who is the cause of my ruin. For if, when I stole my schoolmate's book and brought it to her, if she had given me a sound beating, I should have never grown so wicked in my ways to come to this untimely end. So a lot of interpretations here, and for sake of argument, for sake of illustration, for sake of discussion here today, we're going to assume responsibility on the mother. So obviously this child grew up to be an adult. I mean, practically speaking, he should take responsibilities for his actions, absolutely. But for sake of example, like I said, let's put this responsibility on the mother to look at omission. Now, omission means something that has been neglected or left behind or kind of ignored, especially when there is a ethical or moral weight on that decision. So meaning that you should have done something, but you didn't do something. That's an act of omission, okay? So we're gonna look at the act of omission in terms of the mother's responsibility. And you might simply think on the surface, okay, an act of omission it's very trivial. It's very easy to just look at as frivolous and inconsequential and meaningless because it's a very small action. It's a very small decision. Now, in this case, in this practical case speaking, it doesn't have to be a, beating from the kid stealing the book. It doesn't have to be like a week in timeout. It could be something as simple as saying, hey, you shouldn't steal something, right? One sentence, like a few words, 5 or 6 words. That's an act of omission. Again, it's easy to do, but it's also whatever is easy to do is easy not to do. Okay, it's very, the weight is similar there. So why would it be so, dangerous or so detrimental to ignore things that are very easy to do? Why do people like Jordan Peterson in 12 Rules for Life say, never underestimate the destructive power of sins of omission? Why is it destructive? Why is this such a big deal? Why can't we just ignore things and go about our day? And there's multiple reasons for that. I would say the first thing is that an act of omission is a negative expression of the compound effect. We have all heard intuitively of the power of the compounding penny, the compound effect, right? It's building on, building on, building on. And this can be also, we've talked about in the past, consistency over intensity. You guys were all just talking about this last week in the self-improvement discussion when I wasn't there. Consistency is more important than intensity. So omission would be a negative application of that principle of consistency over intensity. So it's not like somebody is doing something so detrimental, so out of the ordinary that it's going to mess up their life. It's not those huge decisions that really alter our course. It's those small inconsequential decisions that are made hundreds, if not thousands of times over and over and over. So this is using the principle of consistency over intensity as a double-edged sword, right? Everything, I would say, all these principles that we're talking about are all just tools, and it depends on the user of the tool on how they're going to apply them. So in this case, omission kind of compounds into this overwhelming problem in our life, right? And you can think of something like we are made or unmade by our small, trivial, mundane, inconsequential choices. So going back to consistency over intensity for a second, nobody, wakes up, I don't know, in the best shape of their life. Nobody wakes up with their dream profession. Nobody wakes up making 6 figures a year in their job. Nobody wakes up with a very, very healthy and loving and prosperous and fulfilling relationship. These things are built, and how they are built is brick by brick, day after day, in and out, thousands and thousands of inconsequential decisions. Practically speaking, bringing this down to earth for a second, what does this look like in terms of your health? It could be, okay, if you go to the cafe or the deli and you get a meal, what do you choose for your side? Do you choose a salad or an apple, or do you choose the muffin or the cookie, right? Something that trivial. You're not even thinking about it. You don't even think it makes a consequence in your life. But you make enough of those choices, and then you, quote unquote, wake up 20, 30 pounds overweight. Again, nobody wakes up overweight. It happens daily, daily, daily. Same thing in, I don't know, your career. Okay. Do you choose to spend a little bit of time in overtime on your work? Do you choose to adopt a little bit more responsibility? Do you choose to go out of your way to learn about your profession or your skill or your craft or your product or your company's history or your service, etc.? Are you doing your best to develop your traits that are going to lead to your profitability in your career, etc.? Or are you just ending whenever you end and you're just trying to get out of the office early, etc.? Now, when you look at these decisions, you break them down one by one, even maybe 10 days in a row, nothing happens. Okay, nothing on the surface at least is different. But again, you make thousands of those decisions, and that's how people, again, wake up overweight, wake up fired from their job, wake up divorced. Okay, these large scale problems, they don't rapidly manifest overnight. Okay, every effect has a cause, and if you trace back these causes, if you trace back these situations of being overwhelmed, of these huge problems like divorce, like being fired from your job, like waking up at 50, 60, 70, and you realize, oh, I'm not satisfied with the way that I just spent the last 10 years of my life, for example. When you wake up with these very drastic problems, if you reverse engineer it, if you think deductively enough, you can look at a time where your sins of omission were contributing directly to this outcome. Now, how big of a variable, that's up for debate, sure, you know what I mean? But the important thing to realize is we recognize problems when they are in our domain of competence, or else we would not recognize it as a problem. So, meaning that if you look at your relationship and you say, wow, this is going downhill, or wow, I shouldn't let we shouldn't go to bed. I shouldn't go to bed with my partner or my spouse on an unagreed, conclusion on something, or we shouldn't not talk to each other and just like split ways and escapism instead of addressing the issue at hand. Like, again, this is a very small issue, but again, compounded thousands and thousands of times, it will lead to separation, divorce, etc., unfulfillment, a passionless relationship, etc. So if you work deductively enough, you will always find some level of your contribution. And again, it could be very, very, very small. It could have been when it was a seedling. And I would say it's easiest to deal with it when it's very, very small. So going back to Aesop's fable, when this young schoolboy, okay, he did a immoral act. He stole a book from another child. That's immoral. That's unethical. You shouldn't do that. So that's very trivial, but the fact that the mother, again, we're assuming responsibility in the mother, the fact that the mother left that as a sin of omission and she just dispensed with the responsibility and she said, that's not a big deal. I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to address it when it's a seed, even though I know if I extrapolate that seed, it's going to develop into this tree, right? She failed to address it. And then this is a very drastic example, but the son ends up being executed. So I think that's a very important thing to remember, is that there's no such thing. Very, 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 very rarely does a problem manifest overnight, or very rarely is there a big problem that we haven't contributed to over the course of our, past choices and actions and behavior. So There's another story that I was actually going to include in the meetup biography about this, where Jordan Peterson was talking on a YouTube channel. You should actually, I really recommend it to anybody here interested in this topic. He was talking about a children's story about ignoring problems, and it's identical to acts of omission. You could just type in like Jordan Peterson dragon story on YouTube, and he's literally reading a children's book for like a 3 or 4-year-old. And how the book, I guess the plot of the book is, there's a young child, there's a family, a young child, a mother and father. The young child one day wakes up to see a dragon in his room. And he says, oh, that's interesting. And it's very small, it's very manageable. It's the size of like a house cat, for example. And he says, hey, Mom, I see a dragon in my room. And she says, that's nonsense. There's no such thing as dragons. Okay, and obviously the symbolism here is the dragon is representing it could be an unfulfilled promise. It could be an act of neglect. It could be an issue. It could be some, I don't know, family dynamic that is toxic. It could be bad habits, right? It's just a problem. It's something that should be dealt with, right? But the mother is in denial. She says, there's no such thing as dragons. Everything is perfectly fine. I'm just going to have blind optimism and go about my day, okay? And day by day, the dragon gets a little bit bigger. It starts to sit on the kitchen table while they're eating dinner. And then you can notice that the mother is aware of its existence, but she's in denial. Until it gets big enough, it's literally the size encompassing an entire living room. And she's cleaning the house one day and she's like picking up its tail, cleaning under the tail. So she's interacting with it. She knows it's there, but she's still in denial. She's telling her child, there are no such thing as dragons. This doesn't exist. Until eventually it gets literally larger than the house. And I mean, in a comedic way, it stands up and runs away with the house. The dad comes home from work and he addresses it. He says, oh, there's a dragon here. What's going on? And the child is like, yes, I've been trying to tell mother about this dragon. And eventually they confront the dragon. And this could be deeper symbolism with like the hero's journey, for example, confront the enemy. They confront the dragon. They confront this problem. They set their sights on this act of neglect that they've been ignoring forever and forever. And then eventually it shrinks back to size. And the comedic ending is the mother saying, I have no problems with dragons at this size. It's very manageable, right? But the fact is, it was that size, but she neglected it, right? It was a small problem in the family dynamic, in the relationship. Again, whatever realm this manifests in, you can look at the dragon as symbolic as a problem. So, to move on into the application side of this. So what we can learn from the thief and his mother, Aesop's fable, what we can learn from this children's book. I wish I knew the author, actually. I wish I had that. I'm going to look into that. But it's on YouTube from Jordan Peterson. What we can learn from these little fables, I guess. And I would say we can ask ourselves some questions, 3 questions mainly to determine whether or not we are engaging in, I would say, acts of omission or sins of omission, as Peterson would say. So the first question that we should all ask ourselves humbly and honestly and objectively answer as well as we can is to ask ourselves, in what areas of life do we feel like the source of, you can say, guilt or shame or regret or any really manifestation of negative emotion? What are these sources that you think it's from? So it could be like in your career, it could be in your relationship. You feel kind of guilty in your relationship that you're not really addressing your partner's needs, or you're not really asking them what they want out of a relationship, or what they expect of you, or what you can do better to make them feel more loved, etc., or what you can do at your job, or what you can do for yourself, right? To be more at peace with yourself. What should you do for yourself? That's one question. Another question I would say is, in what areas of your life are there quote unquote big dragons in? Okay, so like the comical example of this story with Jordan Peterson, there's a huge dragon in the house, and it doesn't have to be one dragon either. It's illustrative, right? There can be a myriad of dragons. There can be a small one, a large one. There can be some in different realms of your life. It could be your career, your relationships, yourself, your finances, your money, etc. So what areas of your life do you have, quote unquote, big dragons in? And then break it down, work backwards and say, how did this problem manifest? Because again, like I said earlier, it didn't get there overnight. Nobody wakes up, out of a healthy relationship and suddenly it ends in divorce. Nobody is doing well and very industrious and studious in their career and suddenly get fired. Very rarely, maybe for like economical reasons or something, or industry like automation, etc. That's a different story. But work deductively and say, where have I contributed? What did I cause Like, how did I add to this problem? How did I snowball and compound this? How did I apply the negative expression of the compound effect and negative expression of consistency to this very large scale, overwhelming problem in my life? How did I contribute? And now what can I do to break this problem down into manageable, I guess, compartmentalized chunks that I can address day by day moving forward, so I don't make the same mistake again, right? And I guess a third question, it's kind of related to the second, is in what areas of your life do you distract yourself from, or what do you escape from? So let's say you are, I don't know, maybe you have like a side hustle going on, or you're trying to start a business, and you get home from work and you get home from your 9 to 5 and you're trying to work on your business. You know that you should work on your business. You know that you should, even if it's not business stuff, you know that you should call your partner. You know that you should call somebody and address something and work something out. You know that you should go to the gym, etc. You know that you should do these things, but you don't ask yourself why. And fourth, I would say, is a good way to determine whether or not you are engaging in active omission is the word that I just used, should. Okay, if you say that you should do something and you don't, that's an active omission right there. It's very simple. Very, very, very simple. Something a mentor told me that stuck with me forever is, he says, if you could do something, should do something, but don't, that is a recipe for disaster. Okay, so should, when you attach the word should to a task, that is imposing your value structure onto that task. It is saying, I should work out. There's a lot of underlying implications behind that statement. I should work out. Why? Because it's congruent with my beliefs, because I want to live a long, healthy, prosperous, abundant lifestyle. I want to do these things in my future. I want to have mental clarity, physical performance, etc. That's all intertwined behind that statement. I should eat healthy. I should go to the gym. Okay, that's a value structure on my behalf. Some people say they shouldn't go to the gym. That's totally fine. That's their values, right? But if you say personally and intrinsically and empirically that you should do something, and you don't do it, that's an active omission. So turn all of your shoulds into musts, right? I should go to the gym. I must go to the gym. I'm going, right? It's easier said than done, of course, but try not to leave any shoulds in the vocal realm, I would say. And finally, to conclude, is it's kind of related to the act of the I guess experiment of looking at things in terms of dragons in your life. Is when you find problems in your life, even if it's in the world in general or in your life, assume full responsibility. Now, I say assume because it might not be full responsibility. Of course, there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of context, there's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of different contributing factors to that problem. But if you act with responsibility, we covered this in Candide and individualism versus collectivism a few weeks ago. If you act with full responsibility, and if you assume all of the problems, not some, all of the problems in your life are your responsibility and you caused them, this is empowering because you can actually do something about it. Versus if I'm blaming other people, I'm saying, I'm not where I want to be because of this. This area of my life looks this way because of that person, or because of this economic event, or because of this contributing factor. That's disempowering, because even if it was the case, what am I going to do? Sit and wait around for somebody else to fix it? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it might make sense, but it's very disempowering. So focus on the immediate present, focus on what we can do right now to fix and address the issues in our life. Going back to Peterson, this is the very, I guess, misinterpreted meaning behind, clean your room, as he famously says. Set a part of your life in order, and this will extend and extrapolate into further extrapolations of order into your community, into your family, into your friendships, into your career, into your relationships, etc. And it's only a ripple effect from there. And of course, this is more pertinent and true and relevant than ever in the age of social media and information. Everything you do is being broadcasted. You are always being watched. You're always being analyzed. You never know who is watching you on the other side of your decisions. So if you act with full responsibility, again, this is extremely empowering. And even if it's not the case, even if it's not objectively true, I would err on the side of, even if it's objectively, maybe it's false, but you're living an empowered and passionate life, I would go with that than being objectively true and living disempowered. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Shrikant to moderate Q&A.
Excellent. Fantastic presentation as always, John. So let me open it up for questions. We have 4 rules. Type exclamation mark in the chat in order to speak, or raise your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. Feel free to speak your mind, disagree with anything anybody says, but do so courteously. All right, it's going to be Joe followed by Aaron next. Joe, go ahead.
Hi, John. Welcome back and wonderful presentation as always. I was wondering if there was ever a scenario where the sins of omission would actually be appropriate.
That's a good question. I was actually going to include like a contrarian perspective in the breakout group questions. I haven't put much mental energy to that, to be honest. There, of course, I don't know if this is like a underlying rule. There could be exceptions to this rule, of course. I haven't thought enough about that to give examples, but I'm sure, as always, there is. You know what I mean? There are, of course, exceptions. Yeah.
Okay, Aaron next.
Hey, John, good to see you back. So one of the popular mantras of this day and age that I hear a lot is like, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm like, it's my life. And you kind of hear this a lot from like teenagers and young adults who are just sitting at home playing tons and tons, like copious amounts of video games. And their argument is that, well, it's my life. It's my lifestyle choice. I don't really have to do anything. Is like, I'm wondering, like, what exactly is the line between lifestyle choice and sins of omission? So is that teenager that just sits at home playing video games committing a sin of omission every single day they're not living up to their potential? Or do we just have to kind of embrace, oh, that's their lifestyle?
A very good question. Personally, I would say this is idiosyncratic. So if there was a sense of like guilt or shame or regret associated with that, and this might be retrospective, right? They might not be aware of it in the moment, but I do think this would be subjective in the sense, like if I were to engage in that tomorrow, like if I were to engage in just like, I don't know, 10 hours of binge watching a series tomorrow or something, I would feel extremely guilty. I even do if I watch a movie. But that's my personal, I guess, value judgment and value structure upon like my tasks for the day and what I've designed and what I think I, again, should do. That word is a value judgment in itself, should. I can impose my values on them and say they shouldn't play video games. They should get into fitness and health and develop their social skills and get confidence to do all these things. But again, that's a projection on my behalf, you know, so who am I to tell somebody else how they should live their life? But Peterson actually talks about this in terms of he would posit that as an act of omission because it's not like what you're doing that's immoral. It's what you're not doing that's moral, if that makes sense. Like you're not contributing to anybody else's life. You're not contributing as a good leader, as a good example for other people to follow behind. You're not contributing to the ubiquitous and unanimous suffering and ills and malevolence in the world. You're doing nothing to address that or alleviate other people's burdens. So Peterson, and I would be inclined to agree in that sense, would be an active omission.
It's going to be Tanya followed by Jyoti. Tanya, go ahead.
Hey, John, it's nice to see you. It's been a while. And lovely presentation as always. So my question, in terms of sins of omission, now I kind of have this sort of, I wish I sort of have a more understanding of how, I guess, an example that we can use in terms of how this could play a part in our everyday life. So could we, I guess this example would be with family members. Say, for example, if we have a big brother or a big sister, and they sort of, I guess in a way, they sort of know like the roads to life in a thing, and they have younger siblings. Would it be okay to forgive them if they knew, the decisions the younger sibling would make would kind of jeopardize their future, and the fact that they didn't sort of go out of their way to sort of help them not make those choices. Do you think it's okay to forgive them for that? I mean, I know they're the older sibling, but you know, they know that, you know, for the experience, I mean, they'd have more experience. So, I mean, is it okay to not feel kind of bitter about that as a younger sibling?
If I understand correctly, you're positing that an older sibling is watching a younger sibling make unwise choices, and they should correct, or they didn't correct, and
They didn't correct
regret
them, right?
it,
So
and
they didn't.
okay, that makes sense. Well, so the first thing I would say is everybody is operating from their level of consciousness in terms of like morality, in terms of ethics, in terms of life choices. With that said, that people are also operating within their domain of competence. So I would say in order to be able to help another person, they would have to be, I don't know, in some place, I don't really know exactly how to phrase this, but in some place of like excess. So in terms of like, if I were to help somebody in fitness, for example, if I were to help somebody in, I don't know, discipline, for example, I would have to be at a place of, I've already passed some sort of barrier. Like I'm at a, I don't know, let's say I'm at a 6 out of 10 in terms of discipline, which is kind of hard to quantify, but, and this person's at a 3 out of 10. I can say, okay, these are the choices that I've made to get from, I have a similar past as you. These are the choices that I've made to get here, to get here, to get here. But again, that is all predicated on me valuing my current place as I was in the past, more than those choices that whatever like person B, the younger person, is making right now, to look at those as fulfilling. And this kind of ties back into Aaron's proposition as somebody like playing video games, for example. Like I might, you know, project and say that's an unwise decision, right? Because you're wasting your youth. You have these rich years of potential that you could be studying, you could be exploring the world, you could be looking at your talents, your crafts, your affinities for whatever realm and interest that you might have, but you're squandering it away staring at a TV screen. I might project and say that's immoral, but at the same time, everybody in their childhood and their early adulthood, even in their adult life, they make plenty of mistakes. And I think it wouldn't be as comprehensive of a human experience if we hadn't made mistakes and we only followed advice. So if I like was out of the womb and I had immediately these profoundly successful mentors and said, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, I don't think that would be a fully comprehensive view of reality, because I hadn't made any mistakes and I hadn't made any choices of my own volition and will to be able to determine later on in my life, okay, that was a bad decision, I shouldn't do that. So then when I'm tempted to do it again, I understand what happened in the past from doing that. Does that make sense?
Oh my gosh, yes, it makes
Thanks.
total sense. Thank you.
Next up is Jyoti,
I-
Chachi, Jeff, and MP. Jyoti, go ahead.
Okay, there are many factors for the sins of omission. John, firstly, that was a good presentation. I think there's a question of value system in each family and morality. Everybody thinks of morality in different terms. There is no right or left, but right or wrong thing anymore. Everybody thinks, you know, it varies. There's no standard anymore. So I guess the values and the cultural background in some cultures, like I served a culture where the parent was nonchalant about stealing. But if nobody saw you stealing, then you did not steal. So that child got the permission to keep doing it until it became a bigger do. So it all depends on where you're coming from, what's happening in your life, what your background is, and you know, all those things. And in some, for example, in Eastern, I'm sorry, I keep bringing my Eastern values. You know, we were taught, pay me now, pay me later. You got to do it now, or you'll have to pay for it later. But here in the Western, you say, no, when you get to that bridge, you will see. Do right now what you want to do. So there's no right and wrong way of determining whether it's a sin or not, omission or not.
I would still say I wouldn't like cast an open net and like ubiquitously say or unequivocally say, yes, this is a sin of omission, but intrinsically with each value structure, with each culture, with each religion, with each society, with each family structure, with each individual, you can still objectively say a sin of omission is saying that you should do something and don't. Okay, that's my most, I guess, basic, fundamental, objective, and definition, is saying that you should do something and don't. Whatever you believe you should do, that's on you. Again, that's where these cultural differences manifest. People say they should do this thing and should do that thing. I have my own values, and I say everybody should do this. Another person is going to say everybody should do that, right? These are all objective and subjective, rather. But regardless, if you know that you should do something and you don't do it, that is a sin of omission, regardless of culture, regardless of variation, regardless of moral or ethical interpretation or definition. I would still say, if you have an indication that you know something is going to be worse, if you don't intervene and don't act, and you fail to intervene and you fail to act, that is omission, and that is going to negatively compound in the future.
Thanks, John. Next up is going to be Chachi, Jeff, MP, and Jesse. Chachi, go ahead.
Hi, John. This is a really great topic because I was in a previous conversation today where this sort of came up in terms of if somebody did something that you found offensive, like one of your neighbors did something that was offensive, like put a sign in their yard you didn't agree with because you, or raised a flag that you thought was offensive, should you do something? And I kind of was wondering, like, when it comes to being offensive or being even racist, and you don't do anything because you choose not to be confrontational or to, just not to be confrontational or not to do something that would not be, you want to wait for the right time. You want to see if there is a pattern and if something should be done before you take action. If that would be a sin of omission, not to react initially or before you see a pattern.
So I think personally, it depends on how emotionally invested you would be in your value structure of acting, right? So like saying you should or saying I should XYZ, there is a hierarchy within saying you should do something. So if I say I should, I don't know, choose this as a career profession, right? That's a very different value proposition than saying I should do this inconsequential task. So I think it's contingent on how emotionally invested you are with the outcome, like how much it directly impacts your life. Like is this particular, so going along with the example, is talking to that person, being confrontational, knocking on the door, saying, hey, this is a, I don't know, symbol of hate speech. This is a symbol of XYZ. I don't think that it should be up. I don't think that you should exhibit this on your property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you did that and you think that would positively impact your life in a way, or you think you truly believe it would positively impact the world, I would say that would be a sin of omission. If you look at it in high regard. Now, if you look at it as trivial, it doesn't matter. People are just going to get offended at everything either way, right? So I would say, like, I would err on the side of just not being offended at anything, because there's an infinite way to be, there's an infinite possibilities of being offended by something. So if you look at it as inconsequential, like it's not an active omission, like, yes, I believe something. I disagree with that person's belief, but even if they take their sign down, or if I, have an hour conversation with them, it's not going to change much anyway. I don't think that would be a sin of omission, because I'm not placing high value on the outcome.
Jeff, you're next.
Hey, John, thank you for going with this story. I think this story actually has more significance than maybe you've given it. And I think that Chachi was actually going there. The story itself, it is a story about the sin of omission of a person, the mother in this case, not doing something that she could have done, that she could have been, reasonably felt personally responsible to do. But actually, if you extend it one step further, it's about this mother not doing something to change her son's behavior. And so this omission is an omission in actually influencing or potentially even coercing someone else. And the example is always given, you know, it's 1941 and you happen to somehow be allowed into a single room with Hitler. And by that time, you know what Hitler's trying to do. And you can see everything that, you know, is going to go on here and how this might go in Hitler's favor. And you happen to have a revolver and you could take it out and shoot him to death right there. Would you do it? So obviously that's sort of taken out to the nth degree, but it does, it helps to you know, state the question. Is it our job? Is it our role? Not just to take responsibility for ourselves, you know, and do the things like we can do regarding our health or whatever that might be, but actually to take responsibility to create things in society and influence other people in a variety of different ways to do what we consider to be the right thing. And that's an extension of either taking responsibility or omission, shrinking from it, that I think is underestimated. Not that we're always right, but I think it's underestimated and it's actually embedded in this story. And I wonder what you think about that.
Very, very, very interesting point. I took this story at face value and I just looked at, I mean, for the sake of example of being I don't know, it just says schoolboy, so very young child, right? I look at that as an extension of the parent's responsibility, right? Like that is literally the parent's responsibility to instill moral and ethical principles in them at a very young age and to have them socialized.
But extrapolate it to the larger societal situation.
Yeah, exactly. So you said you touched on it a little bit at the end there. I don't know if we can like unequivocally say, yes, we should adopt external responsibility and have this like node of network. And like, if I believe something really strongly, I should tell 100 people a day, right? It's very tricky when we do that because you said it in the end, we don't know if we're right. Like, I don't know, I might change my opinions. I might change my values. I might grow as a person and realize, oh my God, I just negatively influenced 100 people a day with malevolent ideas that are very pernicious and very dangerous, but I didn't know at the time. So that's very tricky because we are all dynamic. We're not like ever finished growing. So it's difficult to instill beliefs and values and, you know, external responsibilities on other people. It might have this guise of altruism and compassion and empathy masking it, sure, but we don't always know what is the best choice. So to err on the side of I guess utility, I would say just if you do wish to change people, I would say lead by example. And if they inquire, that's fine. Share, you know what I mean? Share away. But to just like go around preaching and saying, I'm responsible. I believe this so fervently, so passionately that I'm going to I'm going to stand in a corner and hand out pamphlets. I'm going to tell 100 people a day. I don't know. There's just something very there's something a little bit off about that. Like they don't feel as ingrained and as grounded in their own principles. So they have to have external validation or some sort of community surrounding these principles because they might not be as sure of them as they should be. For example, you know what I mean? It gets very convoluted, very obfuscated, very quick. But I do see what you're saying. There is value in that. There is utility in like being this node and network, as I concluded the presentation with, as leading by example, as building this sort of tribe, as building this, you know, coalition against malevolence, you can say. But I think there is an organic way to do it and there's a contrived way to do it, if that makes sense.
Next up is MP followed by Jesse. MP, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for that presentation, John. I think that this whole topic is very thought-provoking. And I think that with the shoulds and the musts, I see where you're coming from. You know, when you I think approach it from what you know and your level of consciousness, and you exercise that, then the shoulds and the musts can be very constructive to one's growth. At the same time, though, I think that people really get caught up in social, cultural, individual shoulds. I must do this. I should do this. I should have done that. And I think that this fable has really pointed out, you know, the mother, at first I thought, wow, this is really misogynistic. Why, you know, everyone seems to blame the mother for everything, all the social ills in life. But, you know, to look at it more deeply, I think that this really highlights someone who knows better because she's older. Basically, she has more life experience. She's been a child herself. Now she's a mother. And she chose to reinforce something very maladaptive for her son that didn't serve him. So coming from that standpoint, how would you feel just looking at the multidimensionality of the shoulds and value systems for, let's say, a mother who is well educated, went to college, has a profession, let's say in nursing or what have you. I just chose nursing randomly. But culturally, she has learned that it's okay to hit a child when the child is misbehaving. And she has a child, very young, an infant or a toddler, who is misbehaving, you know, grabbing things or spitting food out. And she hits the child. And in her mind, she's doing a service. That she's intervening because she's teaching the child, in her mind, responsibly, that this is not an acceptable behavior and this is the best way for the child to learn. And that's been passed down from generation to generation. And someone else comes along from the same culture who doesn't have a child, at least at that time, and says, you know what, that was not the right thing to do. You should have known better, being an educated person and a parent. You should know better than to hit a child when the child doesn't know any better. So, you know, I think that compassion is very important when someone uses the shoulds and the musts for balance and growth. And I say that just because I think people get caught up in that too. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Definitely. I mean, that's a good example. I would say two things. The first is a quote from Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, where he says, "How goes it with your inner self? All else is of the dust and smoke." Meaning that your own opinion of how you should live, your own opinion, your own subjective judgment on, okay, how am I living? Am I living correctly? That should be superimposed over all the external values. So listening to your own conscience, listening to your own intuition, I think that is of supreme importance. But also, conversely, we shouldn't be stuck in our own ways. And this goes back to my answer to Jeff's question. We change, we grow, we adapt, we evolve, we overcome our old values, we experience new life experiences, and we change our ideas, we change our beliefs, we change our habits. We change our principles, our philosophies, our perspectives, everything. We're very dynamic. So the second thing I would say is we should be living deliberately. We should be living a life by design. We should be living in terms of how much areas of our life were chosen and not settled for. So meaning that we should examine our beliefs. We should examine our conditioning. We should examine why we believe the things that we believe. We should examine who taught us the things that we believe. We should examine how we came to become the person that we are today. And I think more often than not, the closer we can have those values, those opinions, those areas of our life chosen. And this was a former discussion about Thoreau and living deliberately, right? Walden, he had all this societal conditioning. He had all this external, baggage and psychological turmoil he had to work through. He went into the woods for 2 years and he reemerged with his own values, right? And he was thinking how they're going to affect other people. So I think that is a process that we should all engage in on a microcosm, if you will. So engage in introspection, and as Socrates would say, know thyself, right? Engage in analyzing your beliefs, analyzing your conditioning, analyzing your behavior, questioning the sources of your beliefs, and then adapting from there.
Next up is Jesse.
Hey, I am just as happy as a pig in slop or a kid in candy store hearing this. Thank you for the story and the presentation. I love the word examine and kind of apply that to growth, because I think so much all this. I don't think we set out as humans in the day to say, I'm going to screw up by omission today, or even some of the more, you know, so covert, but like some of the more overt things like spanking your child, and you think you're actually correcting them. And I think it's such a competency issue. And I think sticking your head in the sand is one of the worst positions that we can do, and it can be in. And it's just about that journey, and shoulds are relative to all of that. And I think there's one word that goes in with all of this, and it's forgiveness. I forget who said it, but it was many shares ago. But you know, for that child that stole the book and never got to learn because his mother had a sin of omission, for that child to get out of that pattern, you know, forgiveness is not saying that that you're not righting a wrong, and forgiveness is not for the other person. You don't even necessarily tell them. Usually if you have to forgive somebody for something significant, it'll come out sideways and it's a disaster. It's really for ourselves. And I think as a mom, I'm looking at what I've done overtly and pondering all the sins of omission. I mean, this is just such a great topic for me to sit here and reflect on. But there has to be some self-forgiveness to have growth, and then be able to examine, because if you examine too closely and there's a bunch of shoulds that you didn't turn into must-dos, you know, I think it's a gentle process, but hopefully a very intentional one. And I'm just really enjoying this. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. You'll be interested in the one of the breakout questions actually kind of addresses something pertinent and relevant to that point. So we're going to get to that in a few minutes.
Well, on that note, let's move to the breakout rooms. So what do we do in the breakout rooms?
So we have 3 questions for today. The first question: what do you guys believe is the prime motivator for a sin of omission? So if I know I should do something, I know if I ignore it, it's going to turn into a really big problem. Why would I do that? Like, why do people do that? Or why do you do it, for example? So the second question, it's taking an introspective look inward, and it's asking you, what is an area of your life that you might have a dragon in, right? What is an area of your life you should look at so you can ensure that you're doing all that you can? So where in your personal life do you feel like you should be doing a little bit more, or should be doing something different? And the third question, I kind of personally answered it in the presentation, but I'm always open to new perspectives. What do you think are some indicators that we are engaging in acts of omission? So I personally say we should, the word should. If I say I should do something and don't, that's omission right there. Very clear for me. What do you think some other indicators of omission would be?
Excellent. So I'm opening the breakout rooms now. The same rules apply in the breakout rooms. Keep on topic, be brief, and be courteous. If for any reason you don't like the breakout room that you're in, you can just leave and you can come back into the main room over here. Okay. So I'm starting the breakout rooms now. The breakout rooms will run for 20 minutes, after which we'll come into this main room to share our takeaways, both from the presentation and the breakout rooms. Starting the breakout rooms now.